The brass handle didn't move. I jiggled my key again, the familiar click of the tumbler completely absent, replaced by a dull, dead resistance. "Dad? What are you doing?" I turned around on the front porch. My son, Julian, was standing on the gravel driveway, his hands jammed deep into the pockets of his fleece jacket. He was 32, carried himself with the stiff posture of someone who thought he had the whole world figured out, and looked at me with an expression that wasn't anger. It was worse. It was pity. "The key isn't working, Julian," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I set my worn leather grocery bag on the porch bench. "Did the deadbolt jam again?" Julian didn't move toward the steps. He looked past me, toward the heavy oak front door I had hand-sanded and hung 30 years ago when he was just a toddler learning to walk. "The lock didn't jam, Dad," Julian said softly. "I had locksmiths brought out this morning while you were down at the hardware store. I changed them." A cold evening draft swept off the maple trees in the front yard, rustling the late October leaves. I stood there, holding my key ring, trying to process the sounds coming out of his mouth. "You changed my locks? Why on earth would you do that?" Julian took a slow breath, stepping up the first 2 wooden stairs. He held out his hand, palm up, asking for my keys. "Because it's time. We talked about this last week, Dad. You're 66. You're forgetting things. You left the burner on the stove last month, and you're living in this massive 4-bedroom house all by yourself. It's too much for you. You don't live here anymore." "You don't live here anymore." The words hung in the crisp autumn air like smoke. I looked into my son's eyes, searching for a trace of the boy who used to sit on my shoulders while we painted these exact porch railings. I saw only a cold, calculated determination. He genuinely believed he had the legal and moral authority to stand on my porch and lock me out of my own life. What Julian didn't know, what he could possibly have not known, was that he was standing on a foundation built on secrets he had never bothered to ask about. He thought he was closing a deal. He didn't know I still owned the house. "Julian?" I said quietly, taking a slow step back against the solid wood of the door. "Where do you think I'm supposed to go?" "I packed 2 suitcases for you," Julian replied, gesturing toward his trunk. "They're in my car. I booked you a suite at the Oaks Senior Living over on Elm. It's nice, Dad. It's furnished. You'll have people your own age to talk to. I'm doing this because I love you, and because someone has to take responsibility before you end up hurting yourself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small printed envelope. "I've already signed the preliminary listing agreement with the realtor. We're putting the house on the market on Monday. The equity from this place is going to pay for your care, and whatever is left over will go into a managed trust." He was handing me a life sentence wrapped in a neat corporate bow. I looked at the envelope, then at his face. "Where is your sister, Julian? Does Clara know about this?" Julian hesitated for a fraction of a second, a tiny twitch in his jaw that I'd learned to spot when he was 7 years old and hiding a broken window. "Clara agrees with me," he said quickly. "She thinks it's for the best." I didn't hand over my key ring. Instead, I slowly placed it back into my coat pocket. "I'm going to walk down to the diner, Julian," I said, keeping my tone entirely devoid of panic or anger. "I need a cup of coffee." "Dad, don't make this hard," he called after me as I turned and began walking down the dimming driveway. "The car is unlocked. I can drive you to the Oaks right now." I didn't turn around. I just kept walking down the long gravel driveway I had graveled by hand 3 decades ago. I walked 2 miles through the dimming dusk to Miller's Diner on Main Street. My heart was pounding, a heavy rhythmic ache in my chest, but my mind was remarkably clear. For 6 months, I had noticed the subtle shifts, the way Julian insisted on helping me open my mail, the way his wife, Sarah, kept asking where I kept the original deeds and tax receipts, the sudden, overwhelming concern for my health after I mentioned a routine, minor knee surgery. I had wanted to believe it was genuine filial care. I had prayed it was. I sat in a corner booth at the diner, ordered a black coffee, and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly still. I dialed Clara. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad, is everything okay? Julian said he was coming over to help you with the gutters today." "Clara," I said quietly, "Julian changed the locks on the house tonight. He told me I don't live there anymore. He said you agreed with him." There was a sharp, sudden intake of breath on the other end of the line. Silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. He wasn't supposed to do it today," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "Dad, I'm so sorry, but Julian said you were struggling. He showed me the medical reports from your last checkup, Dad. He said the doctor warned you were showing early signs of severe dementia. He said if we didn't step in and sell the house now, the state would take it to cover your eventual medical bills." A cold pit formed in my stomach. Medical reports? My last checkup was a routine physical. My doctor told me I had the heart of a 50-year-old. "Clara," I said. My voice dropped an octave. "Julian did sign anything, did he?" Just a document Julian brought over last Sunday," she sobbed. "He said it was an authorization to let him manage your utility payments so you wouldn't forget them. Dad, did he lie to me?" "Where are you right now, sweetheart?" "I'm at home," she said. "Dad, please tell me you're safe." "I'm at Miller's Diner," I said. "Stay home, Clara. Don't call Julian. Don't say a word to him." I hung up the phone. The picture was beginning to take shape, but it was far darker than I had feared. Julian hadn't just pushed an old man into a home. He had systematically lied to his own sister to get her signature on paperwork, using forged or altered medical claims to convince her I was losing my mind. I took a sip of my coffee. The diner was noisy around me, full of locals laughing over dinner, blissfully unaware of the small, quiet tragedy unfolding in the corner booth. I opened my wallet and pulled out a small laminated business card with a faded gold crest. I dialed the cell phone number written on the back in fountain pen ink. Arthur Vance answered on the 2nd ring. "Thomas? It's late for you to be calling, old friend. Everything all right?" "Julian changed the locks on the Oak House tonight, Art," I said simply. "He told me I don't live there anymore. He's putting it on the market Monday." Arthur was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the rustle of papers in the background. "He thinks he has the power of attorney you signed 5 years ago, doesn't he?" "Yes," I replied. "He thinks that power of attorney gives him authority over the property. He thinks he owns the narrative." "And he doesn't know about the trust restructure from 2 years ago?" Arthur asked softly. "No one knows," I said. "Not Julian, not Sarah, not even Clara. I wanted to protect them from their own worst impulses until I knew for sure who they really were." "Thomas," Arthur sighed, his voice heavy with sympathy. "If he's changing locks, he's crossed a major line. He's likely already signed a representation agreement with a listing agent. If he accepts an earnest deposit on that house under false pretenses, he's looking at severe fraud charges. Do you want me to call the sheriff and end this right now? I can have a deputy at your front door in 20 minutes with the deed." I looked out the dark window of the diner at the passing headlights. "No," I said quietly. "If we call the police now, he'll lie his way out of it. He'll claim it was a misunderstanding, a son just trying to help an aging father. He'll play the victim and Clara will be dragged right into the middle of it. I need to know how far he's willing to go. I need to see the bottom of this pit." "What do you need from me?" Arthur asked. "I need you to pull up the original master deed from 1994, and I need you to check the county land records from 3 weeks ago. Julian been acting too confident. He thinks he knows something I don't." "I'll be at my office in 10 minutes. Come through the back door." An hour later, I was sitting in Arthur's wood-paneled office, surrounded by stacks of leather-bound legal volumes. The air smelled of old paper and tobacco. Arthur sat behind his heavy mahogany desk, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose, staring at his monitor with a deep frown. "Thomas," Arthur said, turning the screen toward me, "look at this." I leaned forward. On the screen was a transfer deed filed with the county clerk 21 days ago. It bore my signature at the bottom, or what looked remarkably like my signature. It stated that I, Thomas Vance, had quitclaimed full ownership of the Oak House to Julian Vance Holdings, LLC, for the sum of $1. My hands trembled slightly as I studied the stroke of the pen. It was a good forgery, very good. It had used a signature from an old tax document I'd left in a filing cabinet in my study, the cabinet Julian volunteered to organize for me back in August. "He didn't just try to sell your house, Thomas," Arthur said quietly. "He stole it. He forged a quitclaim deed, registered a shell LLC, and transferred the title into his own name. He changed the locks because legally, on paper in the county office, he thinks he is the sole owner of that property." A terrible, cold ache bloomed in my chest. It wasn't just greed. It was a calculated, cold-hearted erasure of my existence. He didn't just want the money. He wanted to strip me of my dignity, my home, and my voice, burying me in a senior living facility where no one would listen to an old man complaining about his son. "Why?" I whispered, looking up at Arthur. "Why would he do this? I've given him everything. I paid off his college debts. I bought him his first work truck. I've left this house to him and Clara in my will anyway." "Greed makes people stupid, Thomas," Arthur said softly. "But desperation makes them reckless. Let me do a quick financial search on Julian's LLC." Arthur typed rapidly for 5 minutes. The quiet clicking of his keyboard sounded like a ticking clock in the silent room. Suddenly, Arthur stopped. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. "What is it, Art?" I asked. "Julian's business isn't just struggling, Thomas," Arthur said, his eyes wide. "He took out a massive private loan 6 months ago, nearly $400,000 from a private equity group. The loan was secured against prospective real estate assets. The high-interest repayment was due 3 days ago. If he doesn't transfer clear title of a residential asset to them by next Friday, they foreclose on his personal home and report him for bank fraud." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Julian wasn't trying to secure my retirement. He was drowning. He'd gambled his own family's financial future on some reckless business venture, lost everything, and decided to throw his 66-year-old father under the bus to save himself. "And Sarah?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Does his wife know?" Arthur pulled up another document. "Sarah is listed as the managing partner of Julian Vance Holdings, LLC. She signed the quitclaim acceptance form as the corporate witness." My daughter-in-law. The woman who had sat at my Thanksgiving table for 10 years, complimenting my cooking, hugging me, telling me I was the best grandfather her children could ever ask for. She had co-signed the document that rendered me homeless. "They're selling it fast," Arthur said. "They probably already have a cash buyer lined up who doesn't care about a quick closing. Once the cash hits their LLC account, the money will be wired to offshore creditors to cover his debt. By the time you could hire a litigation lawyer to prove the signature was forged, the money will be gone. The house will belong to an innocent third-party buyer, and you'll be stuck in that senior facility with no paper trail. It was a perfect trap. Cold, efficient, and merciless. "What do we do, Thomas?" Arthur asked, looking at me with deep concern. "I can file an emergency injunction with the county judge right now. We can freeze the title by tomorrow morning." I sat back in the leather chair, looking at the faded photographs on Arthur's wall. Photographs of us, 30 years ago, building our town, raising our children, working until our hands were calloused and our backs ached. "No," I said quietly. "If we file an injunction now, they'll hire a defense lawyer. They'll claim it was an administrative mistake, or that I gave them verbal consent and now suffering from confusion. It'll drag on in court for years, and it'll destroy Clara's life in the process." We let them proceed. Arthur stared in shock. "Let them proceed? Thomas, they're listing the house on Monday. They've changed your locks." "Let them list it," I said, a quiet, resolute calm settling over me. "Let them bring their buyer to the house. Let them think they've won. They don't know the promise I made to my wife before she passed." "What promise?" I smiled, a sad, distant smile. "They think that house belongs to me. They think I owned it as a single individual because my name was on the original 1994 deed. But Julian never looked at the secondary filings from 2 years ago, did he?" Arthur's eyes narrowed. He rapidly clicked through several tabs on his computer, searching deep within the county registry archives, past the basic tax records, into the master land trust filings. Suddenly, Arthur let out a long, quiet whistle. "My God! Thomas." "He didn't check, did he?" I asked gently. "No," Arthur whispered, a slow grin spreading across his face. "He never checked the irrevocable family trust registry. He only pulled the public land record." "Julian thought he was playing chess against an old man who couldn't see the board," I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. "He forgot who taught him how to play." For the next 4 days, I stayed in a quiet, cozy guest room at Arthur's house. I didn't call Julian. I didn't go back to the Oaks Senior Living Facility. I let the silence stretch, allowing Julian and Sarah to believe that I was cowering at the Oaks Senior Living Facility, broke, defeated, and too confused to fight back. On Sunday night, Clara called me, crying, "Dad, Julian put up a for sale sign in the front yard today. Sarah was inside all morning staging the furniture. Your furniture, Dad. They took down Mom's paintings. They put them in trash bags in the garage." "Did you say anything to them, Clara?" I asked gently. "No," she sobbed. "You told me to stay quiet, so I stayed in my car across the street and just watched. Dad, a real estate agent brought a prospective buyer by this afternoon. I heard Julian talking on the porch. He told the buyer that his father had recently passed away and that he was selling the estate to clear probate. He lied, Dad. He told them you were dead." Hearing those words felt like a knife slipping between my ribs. He hadn't just said I didn't live there anymore. In his mind, to justify his greed, he had already buried me. "Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., I told Clara, my voice like iron. "I want you to drive to the house, park down the street, and wait for me. Don't confront them. Just watch." Monday morning arrived, bright, crisp, and clear. The autumn sun reflected off the golden maple leaves surrounding the 4-bedroom oak house I had spent 30 years maintaining. At 9:45 a.m., Arthur and I pulled up in Arthur's sedan, parking a short distance down the road behind Clara's car. Through the front window of the house, I could see movement. Julian was standing in the living room, wearing a sharp suit, holding a leather folder. Sarah was next to him, adjusting a vase of fake flowers on the entryway table. Standing with them was a wealthy-looking man in a tailored jacket, the prospective buyer, and an eager real estate agent holding a thick stack of closing documents. They were preparing to sign a binding real estate purchase agreement right there on my dining room table. "Are you ready, Thomas?" Arthur asked, holding a black leather briefcase. "I've been ready for 30 years, Art," I replied. We got out of the car. Clara stepped out of her vehicle, her eyes red-rimmed, and walked alongside us. She took my arm, squeezing it tight. "I'm with you, Dad," she whispered. We walked up the gravel driveway. The bright red "For Sale, Pending" sign stood proudly in the front yard. I walked up the porch steps, the wooden planks creaking familiarly under my boots. I didn't knock. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a heavy silver master skeleton key, a key that bypassed the front door's lower tumbler deadbolt entirely and engaged the heavy concealed upper steel deadlatch I had installed into the frame 20 years ago for hurricane security. I inserted the key, turned it smoothly, and pushed the heavy oak door open. The front hall fell instantly silent. Julian turned around, his face suddenly draining of all color. The leather folder in his hand slipped an inch before he caught it. Sarah gasped, dropping her pen on the hardwood floor. "Dad?" Julian stammered, taking an involuntary step back. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" The real estate agent looked confused, staring between Julian and me. "Julian, I thought you said your father passed away last month." The prospective buyer frowned, looking deeply uncomfortable. "What's going on here?" I stepped into the entryway, taking off my hat and holding it politely in my hands. Arthur and Clara stepped in right behind me. "I'm very much alive, gentlemen," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and carrying through the entire high-ceilinged room. "My name is Thomas Vance. I am the man who built this house with his own 2 hands." "Dad, stop this!" Julian snapped, his voice crackling with sudden, desperate aggression as he tried to regain control of the room. He stepped between me and the buyer. "You're confused. You're suffering from memory loss. I told you you don't live here anymore. We arranged your room at the Oaks. You need to leave right now before I call the police for trespassing." "Call them, Julian," I said softly, looking him dead in the eye. "Please, call the sheriff. I'd love for Sheriff Hawkins to come up this driveway. He helped me lay the foundation for this garage in 1996. Sarah's face went ghost white. She grabbed Julian's arm, whispering frantically, "Julian, call the police! Get them out of here!" Arthur stepped forward, unzipping his briefcase and pulling out a thick, legal-bound document stamped with the official seal of the state Supreme Court. "My name is Arthur Vance, senior partner at Vance & Associates," Arthur announced, his voice booming with legal authority. "I am the designated legal trustee for the Vance estate. Gentlemen," Arthur addressed the buyer and the realtor, "I strongly advise you to step away from that table and refrain from signing any documents. You are currently participating in an attempted illegal transaction involving forged land titles and corporate fraud." "That's a lie!" Julian shouted, his face turning a furious, blotchy red. "I own this house. I filed the quitclaim deed 3 weeks ago. My father signed it over to my LLC. The county land record lists Julian Vance Holdings LLC as the sole owner. I have the legal right to sell this property." He held up a sheet of paper, his hands trembling violently. "Look at the registry. It's public record. I own this house." I looked at my son. This man I had raised, loved, taught to fish, comforted when his heart was broken, supported through every mistake. I felt no rage. I only felt a profound, aching sorrow for the soul he had traded away for $400,000. "You looked at the land registry, Julian," I said quietly. The entire room hung on every word. "You saw my name on the 1994 deed. You forged my signature on a quitclaim document, and you thought you had taken everything I owned." "I did take it! Julian yelled, losing his composure completely. "It's my name on the title now. You're old. You're useless. You can't even keep track of your own life. I owned this house the second that deed was recorded." "No, Julian," I said softly, taking a step closer to him. "You never owned this house, and neither did I." Julian froze. His breathing was fast and shallow. "What are you talking about?" Arthur pulled out the master trust document and laid it flat on the dining table, right over the fake real estate contract Julian had prepared. "2 years ago," Arthur explained, pointing a clear finger at the sealed clauses, "following the passing of his wife, Thomas Vance executed a complete, irrevocable land trust transfer. He removed his personal name entirely from individual ownership of this property. The sole owner of this house, the land, and all structures upon it is the Mary Vance Memorial Charitable Land Trust." Julian stared at the paper, his eyes wildly scanning the legal terminology. That doesn't matter. He's the trustee. If he's the trustee, his signature." "He is not the sole trustee," Arthur interrupted coldly. "Under the binding terms of the trust created 2 years ago, the primary trustee who holds absolute veto power and sole execution authority over any sale, transfer, or encumbrance of this property is not Thomas." Arthur turned slightly and looked at my daughter. "The sole managing trustee of this estate is Clara Vance." The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear the slow, steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Julian turned his head slowly, like a rusted hinge, to look at his sister. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sarah stumbled back against the wall, clutching her purse to her chest. Clara stepped forward. Tears were running down her face, but her chin was held high. She looked at her brother with a heartbreak so deep it cut through the room like a blade. "You brought me those papers last week, Julian," Clara said, her voice shaking with quiet power. "You told me Dad was dying of dementia. You told me he was going to lose everything, and you begged me to trust you. But Dad had already made me the trustee 2 years ago to protect our family's legacy. He trusted me." She looked at the contract on the table, then at Julian's face. "The quitclaim deed you forged was completely invalid from the second you printed it. Dad couldn't sign this house over to your LLC even if he had wanted to. He didn't own it as an individual. I hold the master title on behalf of Mom's charity. Your fake deed is worthless paper. You owned nothing." Julian stared at his sister, then at me, the reality crashing down on him in a devastating avalanche. The forged deed was a nullity. His shell company owned zero equity. The prospective buyer lenders he owed $400,000 to would realize within 48 hours that he had pledged a fraudulent asset as collateral. He hadn't secured his financial survival. He had signed his own arrest warrant. The prospective buyer immediately grabbed his coat, looked at the real estate agent, and said, "We are leaving, right now." "Wait, please," Julian begged, chasing the buyer toward the door. "It's a mistake. We can work this out. I'll get her to sign." "Don't touch me," the buyer said coldly, brushing Julian's hand off his sleeve as he hurried out the front door, followed closely by the terrified realtor. The front door slammed shut. The house was dead quiet again. Just the 4 of us: Arthur, Clara, Julian, and me. Julian stood by the door, his shoulders slumped, his tailored suit suddenly looking hollow and empty. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror, humiliation, and a sudden, desperate realization of what he had lost. "Dad!" Julian whimpered, stepping toward me, his voice cracking like a terrified child's. "Dad, please, you have to help me. They're going to take my house. They're going to send me to prison. Sarah and we're going to lose everything. Please, Dad, tell Clara to sign the approval. Just this once. I'll pay the trust back. I swear to God, I'll pay it back." Sarah was crying quietly in the corner, hiding her face in her hands. I stood in the center of the living room, the room I had painted, the floor I had sanded, the home I had built to shelter my family from the cold world. I looked at my son, the boy I had loved more than my own life. "I spent 30 years building this home, Julian," I said, my voice thick with emotion, but entirely firm. "I built it to be a sanctuary of truth, hard work, and family." I took a slow step toward him, looking into his tear-filled eyes. "You changed the locks, Julian. You looked me in the eye on this very porch and told me I didn't live here anymore. You erased me while I was still breathing." "Dad, I'm sorry," he sobbed, dropping to his knees on the hardwood floor, grabbing at my trouser leg. "I'm sorry. I was desperate." "I know you were sorry, Julian," I said, softly, gently pulling my leg away from his grip. Arthur stepped forward and placed a formal notice of criminal fraud reporting on the table. "Julian, Sheriff Hawkins is waiting down at the station. We are filing the official forgery report in 1 hour. I suggest you hire a criminal defense attorney before the bank realizes what you've done." Julian stayed on the floor, his head bowed, weeping quietly into the hardwood planks. Sarah didn't comfort him. She didn't even look at him. Their marriage, built on shared greed and arrogance, was collapsing under the weight of its own deceit. "Clara," I said gently, turning to my daughter, "let's go pack my heavy winter coat from the hall closet." 10 minutes later, the front door of the oak house opened again. Julian and Sarah had left in silence, their heads hanging low, driving away into the legal and financial storm that would consume the next 10 years of their lives. Arthur had gone back to his office to handle the formal filings with the county prosecutor. I stood on the front porch with Clara. The autumn wind blew through the trees, dropping a shower of golden leaves onto the gravel driveway. "Are you going to stay here, Dad?" asked Clara softly, holding my hand. "Or do you want to come live with me for a while?" I looked at the strong oak door, at the freshly installed locks, and at the porch where I had spent half my life watching the sunrise. "I think I'll stay here tonight, Clara," I said with a faint, peaceful smile. "The house is quiet now. The truth has settled the dust." She hugged me tightly, kissed my cheek, and walked down to her car. I watched her drive away until her taillights disappeared around the bend in the road. I walked back inside my home. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't open the mail. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the kettle, and made myself a single cup of tea. I walked into the quiet living room and sat down in my old leather armchair by the fireplace. On the mantel above sat a dusty silver picture frame. It was a photograph taken 25 years ago, a picture of a young boy sitting on his father's shoulders, laughing under the shade of a massive oak tree, both of us believing that love was something that could never be locked away.